So, welcome back to part two of this series where I'm explaining to you how I can look at gene blueprint for insights into your bone health or bone health in general, and where I may see some risks, where I may see some opportunities. What I'm showing you in this short series is that bone health goes far beyond vitamin D and calcium. And as I've stressed, they're important. But genetics and science also helps us to look in places that we may not be thinking of, you may certainly not be thinking of, and your doctor and the team that look after you may not have thought of. So let's jump back in and start where we left off. So I'm going to share my screen here. And actually, where we left off was inflammation. So if you're jumping back in, you'll say, inflammation. So what did I talk about in the first session? First, I was talking to you about how bone is a living organ, if you will, and it's constantly in turnover mode. It's constantly replacing the old with the new. And the challenge we have is what happens is there's too much turnover. Too much turnover can leave you in a negative balance, something we call resorption, where the bone, you're losing bone mass. And that is often associated with a diagnosis of osteoporosis, osteopenia, osteoarthritis. So not the direction we want to go in. And bone building is what we want to constantly support so that your body has the ability to, again, clean out the old, replace with the new, and constantly do this. That's a healthy bone matrix. So what we talked about thus far was the impact of hormones and genes that can impact the availability of sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen for bone remodeling and bone building. Both of them are integral to bone structure, bone integrity, bone health. Then we also looked at inflammation, genes like IL-6, IL-1, IL-1B, TNF alpha, and how they can be what we call gain of function genes. Just given an opportunity and they'll show up. But fortunately, I was also able to show you that we can introduce specific foods that help turn down the volume, particularly on a rabble rouser called IL-6. So that's where we left off. And now we're going to jump into looking at some other areas that can impact negatively your bone balance. So once again, I'm going to turn my video off so we're not distracted here, and let's get started. So stress, stress, I think we're all familiar with the association with. A lot of stress is detrimental to your health. And of course, bone happens to be a target too. Bone does not get left out of the conversation. The question is, have you ever equated stress to bone health? So what is it about stress that can impact your bone health? So again, you may be very familiar with cortisol. So cortisol, you want to think of as being the hormone that's released in stress situations. It has a lot of reaches in the body, as you can see here. And one of the reaches is bone. And you can see here that it's associated with a reduction in bone formation. Basically, stress or cortisol induces that fight or flight response, raises your blood pressure, raises your blood sugars, and when you're constantly in that state, it starts to undermine your health. So, in association with stress, what does it do? How does it correlate with your bones? Well, as you can see here, stress alters the release of key hormones that are involved in bone development, essentially reducing their availability or shutting them down. Some of these really important hormones are growth hormones, and growth hormones have a deep connection, if you will, with insulin growth like factors. In fact, insulin growth like factor is one of a category of growth hormones. So basically, a stress can actually reduce their availability, and the absence of growth hormones, which include insulin like growth factor 1, very important, results in a reduced rate of bone remodeling and a gradual loss of bone mineral density. What you want to take from that is you've got your balance or your seesaw, right? You're in negative balance. These are, if you can think of growth hormones as being anabolic, they help build. If you don't have them available to help you build, guess what? You're going to go in the other direction and you're going to deplete them. Okay? Cortisol release, which is associated with stress, the more cortisol you release, the less availability you may have of alkaline phosphatase. This is, what does that mean? So ALK-Phos, or alkaline phosphatase, is one of the markers that your physician may order to look at bone health and bone metabolism, because it's integral to storing or getting phosphorus into your bones, right? Alkaline phosphatase. Lower levels are associated with lower bone density. So you can see that these are very important molecules or markers that we look at, and there's a direct association between stress, cortisol, which is high levels of cortisol, which is a reflection of stress, it's what's released, and lower levels of these key molecules. So stress upsets the apple cart. And there's also a relationship between cortisol levels and a decrease in the uptake of calcium into your bones. That's quite a complex process, but just think you can be eating all your leafy greens, and if you eat dairy and that's where you're getting your calcium from, you could be gobbling it up. But if you're doing that in a super high stress environment, guess what? You could be eating for nothing, or the return on ingestion, as I like to say, is lower. So stress definitely impacts your bones. It alters the balance. See how many things there are that are altering your balance. So then we have a process called methylation. And methylation is probably one of the most undertaught, misunderstood, and overlooked processes in your body. And those of you who may be listening in who are clinicians will probably be saying, "We never learned about that in school." And even if you didn't study the sciences in school, or like a university or what have you, you probably didn't learn about methylation in your biology class either. And yet it is so important. It's like a core process in your body. And I feel it's one of the huge disconnects with bone health. Again, as you heard me say, I live with osteopenia and osteoporosis, and we're turning it around because I have all the facts and I know how to do this now. Okay. But what I've discovered in my research is there's definitely a role, a connection between methylation and your bones. So let's try and understand this, what this is. The point I want to make to you here is what I've noted in yellow. When I look at hundreds of DNA reports, the process I see most frequently compromised is methylation. So what you're looking at here are a bunch of genes that impact this process, which I'm going to explain to you. And the key nutrients that support this process of methylation are all your B's. So yes, there's a B1, a B5, and a B7 missing here. We just like to say, get your B's. But if you super focus in on this methylation process, or if you've learned from your doctor, you need some methylation support, or more importantly, if you've worked with a clinician like myself, we'll be able to look at your methylation process through the lens of your genes and see whether it's something we might want to see where you're at. Okay, but all your B's are important: magnesium and zinc, and choline, which you'll find in eggs, sunflower seeds, edamame, so whole soy, or betaine, which you find in quinoa or beets, Swiss chard. These are also very important molecules that support this methylation process. So what you're looking at here on this snapshot from a gene blueprint is, in this individual, there is, this is an indication to me to say, let's just take a look at whether you have all the nutrients you need for this process. So what is methylation? Let's read the left and then we'll go to the right. So methylation pathway, or the methylation process, is a major process in your body that produces what we call a methyl group here. A methyl group is a carbon and three hydrogens. And as you can see here, it's a group, it's attaching to this molecule. So what methyl groups do is they're an activator molecule for hundreds of reactions in many, many metabolic pathways. So think of them like a switch. They're an activator. So here we have a molecule, and if it didn't have the methyl group, this carbon 3 hydrogen molecule, then it can't do the process that's assigned to this molecule. So why are they important? Well, you just heard where they act like a switch. They're an activator for hundreds of processes in your body. They're also important for repairing DNA, which is your recipe for how you're built. And they can also turn genes on and turn genes off. So they can modify DNA, and we call this epigenetics. So what does this mean? They can actually, as you're seeing here, we're looking at some DNA here, you're seeing that these methyl molecules are attaching to your DNA, and I'm making this extremely simple. And by the process of attaching, what they're doing is they're silencing the gene, or they're turning the gene off. So I like to think of it as, when you're reading a book, your book is open or your tablet's open, right? But when you're done reading, you either turn your tablet off or you shut your book, which means you can't read anymore. You stop the process. This happens to be really, really important in how you operate, because we do want your genes to be read, right? You want to read your book when you want to read it, but when you're done, you're done. Same in your body. Your genes have a function, which is to produce proteins. Your body will say, I need proteins or I don't need proteins. We need them genes turned on, genes turned off. So this process of methylation is one of the ways your body can regulate protein production processes, kind of like a balance, right? So methylation it's an initiator. It helps initiate processes, but it shuts down processes by the process of epigenetics that's attaching these molecules to your DNA and say, that's it, we're good, stop the line. What's this got to do with bones? So I'm just going to give you the highlights here, because the biochemistry is way beyond the scope of what I'm trying to teach here. Just know that methylation is important. So we know three things. DNA methylation is necessary for proper development and function of bone cells. So it's helping once again with maturation, basically. So what it does, it helps in key signaling pathways that help your body build bone. So nothing happens in your body without switches and integral signaling and conversations between molecules. Methylation is really important in the positive direction of building bone. So it's working as signaling switches, super complicated pathways. So we need those methyl groups to do it. Now, there's something else. The flip of that is that, remember I said those methyl groups are important for turning genes on and turning genes off? Well, sometimes if we don't produce enough methyl groups to turn genes off, we actually induce bone resorption. We send bone building in the opposite direction. In other words, methyl groups can turn on the process of building bone. At the same time, they're going to turn off the process of breaking down bone. So you need enough methyl groups. And sometimes if you don't produce enough methyl groups, and let's go back, in this case, this may be a case where this person may not be producing enough methyl groups. Does that mean they're going to have bone issues? Not necessarily. One gene or one process doesn't work by itself. But if you don't produce enough methyl groups to turn off the process of breaking down bones, then you have a negative balance. Your body is always working in balance. Methylation is important to build bone, but it's also important to prevent the breakdown of bone. It's a balance. And this is something that we're seeing in the scientific literature that I feel personally has been significantly overlooked. So here's something. How do we know if if your methylation process is working? Well, we can look at nutrients. There's a lot of symptoms that are associated with poor methylation, a lot of them more in brain health, but methylation is very, very far reaching. There's a lot of lab tests we can run looking at nutrients and different molecule ratios. But one of the markers we look at, which is very easy to get from your doctor, is homocysteine. Okay, homocysteine is a marker, as you can see here, that we look at for inflammation in your body. High levels of homocysteine are frequently a reflection of a poorly functioning methylation cycle. I'm not going to get into how that works. If you do want to learn more about this, you can enroll in a couple of my courses. One is called the Genomic Kitchen Express course, where I'm talking to you about how to choose foods and which foods and how they work with your genes. And I explain methylation. If you really want to go deeper and have a really fun culinary experience, then enroll in the Genius course that I did with my partner, Kate Waters. And here we're talking all facets of health, but we do a nice explanation of methylation and what you can do in your kitchen. Okay, so high levels of homocysteine is a marker that we may look at that says, your genes aren't really showing up here. They're not working very efficiently, and we need them to work efficiently. So how do you do that? Eat your B vitamins, your magnesium, and your zinc, okay? I kind of pointed out those nutrients to you a couple of slides back. Well, it turns out that homocysteine is also a useful marker to understand your bone health because it negatively interferes with bone metabolism. What does that mean? It's all about balance, right? High levels of homocysteine are associated with increasing osteoclastic activity, resorption, bone demineralization, and decreasing osteoblastic activity, which is bone building. In other words, homocysteine high levels, a measure of methylation, can upset the apple cart again. Do you see how genes are guiding thinking? Genes guide thinking. We look at a lot of different genes. We listen to you and what your health history is, what your asks are, and we're also looking at how can we do some preventive work. So if I see a number of genes that are impacting methylation, hormone imbalance, lots of inflammation, you have a super stressed job, I know you're not eating well, I could start to put it together. So you know what? Let's just run a few tests and just optimize how you're eating so that you put your best foot forward, not only for your own health, but in this case, at restoring restoring bone health or preventing um, bone decline, which you don't want. So high levels of homocysteine are flipping that switch, potentially pushing you towards breaking down bone as opposed to building bone. So don't take any chances, okay? You can prevent high levels of homocysteine by eating the foods rich in B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc that actually help the methylation process. When methylation works beautifully and smoothly, your homocysteine levels will be normal. So this is a very easy marker that we can look at in the lab, but we wouldn't just look at that lab by itself. Okay, you're not just going to go in and order homocysteine, ask your doctor for homocysteine, it comes back high, and you say, uh-oh, I've got bone problems. We look at many markers. I'm just showing you lots of places where we look. So kind of getting towards the end here, just looking at a number of different areas that are showcased or we could get glimpses into by looking at your genes. Your genes can also give us insights into your vitamin D levels, the availability of vitamin D in your body. So why is vitamin D so important? So I make a note here that scientists have mapped the points at which vitamin D interacts with our DNA, and they've identified over 200 genes that vitamin D influences. So we think vitamin D, sunshine, bones, you know, and whatever else, usually bones, right? But also the immune system. So vitamin D is really, really important. What I want to show you here on this nice chart. So in blue are um, the number of different genes that we look at when we're looking at the availability of vitamin D to do its job. Okay, so there you probably all learned that, you know, if you go outside and play in the sun, or like if maybe you're riding your bike or running or swimming, playing golf or what have you, if you go outside, the sun's your best source of vitamin D. Not for everyone, because this particular gene is integral. To the process by which you may be able to use the sun to initiate the way your body can produce vitamin D. So DHCR7, as you can see, is an important switch between cholesterol, precursor for vitamin D, and vitamin D production in your skin. So it interacts, you need the precursor molecule, starter molecule, UV light, and this gene. If this gene is a tad dysfunctional, or the next gene in the process, then you don't necessarily benefit from going outside and getting sun exposure, because the gene's not functioning. So you don't even have you got the fuse, but you don't have the switch, or you don't have the lighter to light the fuse. Okay, so vitamin D metabolism is actually quite complex. There's a lot of genes that are involved in getting the starter molecule, the precursor molecule, cholecalciferol, and converting it into the active form, which is this form that your body needs. Okay, so these genes are maybe all involved in this process. And then once you get this active form, it's got to bind with something called VDR, the vitamin D receptor, which actually needs vitamin A at the same time. And then it can do its job. It's a communication or signaling molecule, otherwise known as a hormone. But what I want you to see here is there's lots of genes that may be not functioning. You know, they're all standing in a line. You know, like if you're driving your car and you pull up in a highway and you can see all those traffic lights down the highway and they're all green, awesome. If they're all red, not so great. Some are green, some are red. Think of that like your genes. So it's very often, it's very, very common that we will see individuals, you may be some of them, that you just have low vitamin D levels. And maybe you are eating your eggs or what have you, but you can't shift the dial or shift the needle, right? That has to do with your genes. So yes, we look at vitamin D. And in this particular case, under bone health, these genes, the VDR receptor, is something that we're looking at. And here in gray, it's functioning. Gray in this particular test means the genes are showing up and doing their job. But there's a little bit of a bobble here. CYP2R1, it's probably about 90% efficient. Can you see that? It's sort of like step 2 in this process. Different genetic testing companies will look at different genes that they consider important to vitamin D metabolism. And in this particular test, we're also looking at the impact of the thyroid. This is all integral to the health of the bone matrix. This is looking at collagen, and this is looking at the bone matrix and turnover as well. So in this case, if I was just looking at genes associated with bone health, the matrix itself, not so bad, right? We kind of got a blue means you're about it, you know, somewhere between 50 and 75%. If we're just looking at those genes, but as you know, we look at lots of genes that impact bone health. So yes, vitamin D is important, and genetics definitely can differentiate whether you need to take a supplement or really hone in on some vitamin D rich foods, or both, or whether, you know, you're the lucky one. Yeah, all your genes are lining up in the green in the lane, and you can be outside and get all the vitamin D you need. I would say that's not that common. So yeah, vitamin D is important. And then finally, something else that is kind of coming on our radar screen more and more, we're looking at bone health, and this is a little bit fuzzy here, are something called matrix metalloproteins. So they're represented here in as MMP. You can see MMP1 and MMP3. So you might say, well, why does it say collagen and joints here and not bone? Because this company is reporting MMP under collagen and bone and joints, but behind the scenes, we're also thinking about the impact of that with bone as well. So what is it that they do? They're proteins that are involved in tissue remodeling, so breaking down and rebuilding, so cycling, just like bone. So they are involved in normal bone remodeling, as we've been talking about, but also in the synthesis or the production and breakdown of collagen and cartilage. So they're involved in structure, your infrastructure, your hard infrastructure, the stuff that kind of is skeletal and adheres to your skeleton as well. Both of these proteins, there's a whole family of them, require zinc and calcium. Okay, so once again, you're thinking, my gosh, calcium, I thought it's good for bones. Yeah, it's good for bones in so many ways, but so zinc. You see, zinc is a supportive molecule for these proteins, but zinc is also really important for methylation. Methylation, as you know, is important to that balance between building bone and breaking it down. So these matrix metalloproteins, they do their job and they're tightly regulated by other proteins. They're called TIMPs, just so you know, right? Which we also report on in certain genetic tests. So why is this relevant, these matrix metalloproteins? Because the overexpression of them, the overactivity or the deficiency or inefficiency of them can impair healthy bone turnover. Okay, so bottom line is they can be hyperactive, like, overly active, or basically not showing up, whereas we need them to be in balance. So they can be rabble rousers. Okay, so it's something else we think of. And why is this important? And these overactivity or inefficiencies, too good, or just, just slackers, as I like to say, is because dysfunctions in these particular proteins are associated with rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, and damage to the bone structure. One of the ways I like to think about it is they can kind of chip away at the outside of your bones. That's so you think of them as building bone, but when they get to be dysfunctional, they can chip away at what we call the sort of extracellular matrix or the outside matrix of the bone. Not so great. You need good, strong, functional bones, and you need that hard outer shell, if you will, functioning efficiently for you. So that's just like a little bit of an aside, and again, something that we see through genes. So what you're hearing me say is I put together genes from another number of different parts of a report and put them on the table, if you will, on my brain table and say, there's enough information for these genes to say, okay, let's take a look. If you're 40, do me a favor, go get a bone mineral density test just as a baseline. Okay? So genes tell me what questions to ask, what to look, what to talk to you about, what maybe to test for. Okay? So I've come back, and where to next? What can you do now? Okay? So you've been through 2 sessions. Let's go through this. Take your bones seriously. They are our infrastructure, right? They are what carry us around. They're like this silent warehouse that we sort of take for granted until we get a lab that says, oh, you haven't been doing so well. Here, take this medication. Not so. Be assertive, jump into preventive action. Make sure you get a bone mineral density test earlier rather than later, and push back if you need to. Take your bones seriously. So you can download, I have a free resource to help you understand nutrients you may not have thought of for your bones. We've talked about the classics here, calcium and D for sure. Okay, but then you're going to learn about zinc. How much protein do you know? How much vitamin D do you need? So anyway, download my free resource that I put in the blog notes next to this session, so you can take a look at that. Pay really close attention to your B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc, because they're ones that are not talked about with bone metabolism or bone health, but I've shown you, I've correlated them for you here. Use an app. to evaluate your diet. See if what your nutrient efficiencies and deficiencies are. You know, an app's not going to lie. Sometimes it can be a little fiddly putting information in, but see where you are with these key nutrients. Go beyond vitamin D and phosphorus, sodium, and calcium. Look under the cover. And if you don't want to do that, work with a licensed nutrition expert. Yes, make sure you know your vitamin D level. It is important for your health. But how many reactions is it associated with? How many genes did I say? More than 200 have an interactivity with vitamin D. Pretty important. Something I didn't talk about is build fermented foods into your diet. Okay, if you don't have them in there, or you don't tolerate them, that might be something you want to talk to a licensed clinician about, because they're really, really important. And not everyone can jump into them right away. Some people, if your gut health is off, it's not something you want to go to right away. But the reason they are so important is they are nature's source of vitamin K27. We call this menaquinone 7. Vitamin K27 basically activates the protein called osteocalcin that adheres calcium to your bones. So you can eat all the calcium you want, but if you can't stick it to your bones, it goes in and comes out again. Okay, that's a little bit simplistic, but fermented foods are a fabulous source of vitamin K27, and you need them. But again, if you haven't been eating them, introduce them very slowly, like a teaspoon. If you know you're reactive to them, talk with a licensed clinician. You probably already are, about, how can I introduce these important foods? What can I do? Okay. Protein. Talk about this in my download. Make sure you are eating at least 1 gram per kilogram of your body weight in protein. Honestly, you need more. The older you are, if you're kind of midlife, over 40, I want to say 1.2, 1.4 is a threshold. Okay, how do you do this? What's 1 gram per kilogram? Take your body weight, divide it by 2.2, and that will give you weight in kilograms. And then multiply that by, I'm going to say 1.2. And that gives you your target protein grams per day. And you can track that in an app, and you will be amazed how inefficient many of you are or will be in protein. You have to work hard to get protein. Okay, if you're more of a plant slant versus an animal slant, you have to work even harder. Do not miss these targets. Your bones need protein. Okay, again, if you're over 40, I'm going to say you start at 1.2. Okay, 1.4 is my target. Okay, weight bearing activity stimulates, it stresses your bones and forces that bone turnover. It forces you, it forces your bone into active remodeling, if you will, not decline, but remodeling. It's a stressor to your bone. Stress is in this level, in an exercise level, is positive. Okay, if you're not doing weight bearing or resistant activity, replace your aerobic activity with this just to kickstart it. It is that important. Your bones don't respond to aerobic activity, they respond to resistance and weight bearing activity. Okay, I insist. Manage your stress. You know why. Get a DEXA by age 40. I insist on it too. Particularly if there's a history of osteopenia or osteoporosis. If you can detect osteopenia, you can turn it around with some of the tools and the information I'm presenting to you. If you really want to learn more about some of these processes of inflammation, oxidative stress methylation, I pointed out 2 courses, the Genomic Kitchen Express course or Genius. Both of them will help you optimize your diet, get all the B's and the Z's and the magnesium and zinc in. And finally, if you're really curious, the best thing that you can do for your health to really understand your internal operating system is to get a DNA test. You don't necessarily have to work with me. We use clinically relevant testing around the world. That's what I'm trained to do, and the clinicians I work with and train are trained to do this. But a DNA test will give you, it's a mirror of who you are. Your genes don't lie. Your DNA test doesn't lie. it's a reflection of you. So if you really want to understand you, get answers to maybe some of your health history, your family history can shed a little bit of light there, but really optimize your health. It is the best thing that you can invest in. So all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this two-part series looking at bone health. Please reach out to me, Amanda@genomickitchen.com, if you have any questions. Watch this video as many times as you want. Jump into my courses, read my blog. Happy to help you at any time.